Hello, everybody. My name is Lee Alvarado. I'm with CU Boulder Career Services and the Alumni Association. Welcome to all those on Zoom. You're continuing to come in, and we're also live on Facebook. So welcome to those who are joining us live at our CU Boulder Career Services Facebook page. And today, so just a little, I'm going to share a few things before we get into the panel. One, this is our weekly job search group that we've been doing now for the last few weeks, and each week we have a different topic, and this week we're going to do Recruiters Tell All. So we have a wonderful group of panelists who are going to be sharing their wisdom and answering your questions. So we're going to get into that in just a minute. I want to point out a couple more things. One is to join our LinkedIn page, which is CU Boulder job search group. And that's a group where we are posting resources and tools, articles every day. Jennifer and I are getting articles and resources and things that are coming through that will support you in your job search. And so that's the place where all of that's going to be. So that is on LinkedIn. Again, that's CU Boulder Job Search Group. And so check that out. Also, if you need to make an appointment, if you want to meet with either Jennifer or myself for career advising, you can find us by going to our website, and that's colorado.edu/career. A chat box will pop up, and in that chat box, you could say that you want to schedule an appointment, and you do get 2 free career appointments with us. So if you need support, that's where you will find us, and we're happy to help you as you're navigating this time. Let's see, and then next week, so each week we have a different topic for this group. Next week, tips and strategies for handling stress and anxiety, and I will be leading that. That will be next week, Wednesday, 12 to 1. Every week, this is where you'll find us, and we have different topics and different speakers, so tune in for that. And Jennifer Duncan is joining me also. She's going to be monitoring the chat. And so as you have questions, you can post those in there. The way we're going to do this, as I turn it over to the panelists in just a few minutes, we're going to go through. I have some questions already that I will be asking them. And then we're going to set aside the last 25 minutes or so for questions from all of you. So we have somebody monitoring Facebook Live, so you can post questions there. And we also have Jennifer who will be monitoring Zoom. So post your questions if you're on Zoom there, and then she'll be shouting those out. We'll do our best to get to all the questions. There's a lot of you on today's call, so we're not going to be able to get to everyone, but we will do our best. So, all right, well, welcome again, and so glad you all are here with us today. I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have 4 panelists with us today. Joshua Chen with Deloitte, and I'm going to just say their names, and then I'm going to have each of you share a little briefly about your background. We have Joel Crosswhite with Visa, Sarah Glasser with Google, and Casey Kipple with CU Boulder. So if you each can unmute yourselves and share a little bit. Joshua, I'm going to have you start. Just share just briefly about your background.
Hi everyone, excited to be on this panel today. My name is Josh. I am a recruiter, most recently with Deloitte, but I've actually recruited across a number of different companies, startups, nonprofit, that type of thing. So excited to be here to give you a little bit of an inside look about how we do things and kind of what the future is going to look like in light of the current circumstances.
Great, thanks Joshua. Sarah, you want to go next?
Absolutely, thank you all. Hi, I'm Sarah. I have been a recruiter for about the past 5 years, but before that worked in higher education and nonprofits. And currently I'm a recruiter at Google, recruiting primarily in the technical space, but have experience recruiting in finance as well. So yeah, excited to just be an open book, answer questions as transparently and honestly as I can, and try to give some advice.
Great, thanks Sarah. Casey.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Casey Kipple. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. I have been working as a recruiter in the talent acquisition field for over 9 years. I started my career in the aerospace industry and transitioned to higher education here at CU Boulder. And I'm just so thrilled that you all are here today and very much looking forward to answering your questions.
Thanks, Casey. Joel, are you with us?
Yep, I'm here.
Yay.
So hi, my name is Joel Crosswhite. I started my career about 20 years ago in IT. Done from software development to system administration. Currently, I'm a manager at Visa for our online development team, and excited to be participating in this. Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. All right, so we're going to start with the first question. How have your recruitment strategies changed since the coronavirus pandemic? Who would like to start with that?
I'm happy
Josh,
to.
go
Sure.
ahead. Yeah.
No? Yeah.
Go for it, Josh.
You know, thanks everyone. I think, the reality is we're all still figuring this out as we go. We're taking it day by day. I mean, obviously there are some industries like hospitality that have been more affected earlier on, and then others like healthcare that continue to hire despite this. So I think what I'm seeing though is that there are companies that are still hiring. So people are worried that we're freezing across the board. That's not necessarily true. There are some very crucial industries that need help right now. And so if you have been impacted, I would encourage you not to think like this is a time where nobody is hiring. I think a lot of people are. What we're doing right now from our perspective is a lot of pipelining. So in the recruiting world, that means that you talk to people proactively before you need them, with hopes that when you get the approval to lift that pause, if you are on one, that you will be able to continue to do so. So if there are any companies that you're interested in, just know that they might not have a role for you actively, but it certainly doesn't hurt if you find the right recruiter tied to that industry or that functional area like sales, to go ahead and reach out to them and ask, hey, is your organization still hiring, or are you just pipelining right now? And that's your cue to be able to understand what might be happening internally. So that's kind of how we've shifted a little bit. It's gone from more of a reactive, we need to hire now approach to a more proactive, how do we get ahead of this so that when the economy comes back, we're able to hire quicker and get people that we've talked to into those jobs faster.
Great, thanks, Josh. So I'm just going to call on you to make it easy so people aren't talking over each other. Casey, any comments about that?
Yeah, this absolutely was an incredible transition, right? We were all together and then heading into a virtual world. And I'm just so impressed with CU Boulder and how quickly we were able to do that, not just for our students, but our staff and faculty. And I would say, one of our biggest changes right now is getting additional approvals at the senior leadership level, so our cabinet, in order to move forward with recruitments. So I second Josh that, it's hard living in this world. You can't have the assumption that folks aren't hiring. We are hiring right now. So I think utilizing tools like LinkedIn and really making those connections and talking with recruiters can be really advantageous, but it definitely has been a transition. And I think for our team in particular, we really looked to how can we best prepare our candidates? What resources do we have now that we're all virtually interviewing? So the key pieces for us is additional approvals and really what resources that we need, not just for our team, but for our candidates to have it be a successful experience.
Great, thanks, Casey. Sarah, any thoughts?
I would echo Josh's and Casey's insights. Google's kind of experiencing the same, where we're being very intentional and kind of looking at the roles from a business criticality standpoint. What are our need to have? Absolutely, business priority roles, what would be kind of nice to have, and then what we can kind of hold off and wait on. So definitely still looking to hire. There are definitely an extra set of approvals as well, second set of eyes, just making sure that, it's not just the recruiter who's saying, I think it's a business critical role. It really is from, multiple stakeholders who are in agreement moving forward. And I think from a candidate standpoint too, just honesty and transparency at least has been my MO throughout all of this, because it is a new time, that we're all kind of navigating together. And many recruiters have not personally experienced this situation before. Many candidates have not as well. So, just building a strong relationship with that recruiter is definitely important, but not being too, self-defeating in terms of your mind, trying to be optimistic, which I know some days is harder than others, but definitely, being forward thinking and building those relationships and, strategizing now is important as well.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Joel, any
Yep.
comment?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just to kind of echo what's been said already. Certainly, I mean, this is a different time. This is kind of a unique time, in that I don't think we've um, seen this before, and so we're navigating new waters, and certainly priorities are being evaluated and taken a look at to see what is needed and versus what is wanted, and so that's shifting directions. That being said, is still keep trying and reaching out to whomever you can, and for support, for help with trying to obtain other positions. And it's not a full freeze, but certainly is a bit of a slowdown.
Okay. Yeah. So next question, we have a lot of students that are going to be graduating in about a week and feeling nervous about their future. And I suspect many of them are on the call today. What advice do you have for new grads who are about to enter, the most challenging time that any of us have been in? Any advice that you have for our new grads? Casey, do you want to start?
Yeah, happy to start. So, in thinking about this, when I graduated, it was 2010. And this was another time of uncertainty where it was not as easy to get a job. And actually, before I went to industry, I actually had 4 different positions that I was working. And I remember, just being so excited, I'm out there, I've graduated, I'm going to apply, and then starting to get those rejection notices. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is don't get discouraged, keep trying, keep applying, keep making those connections, because we will eventually recover from all of this. And it looks and feels so different than if everything was fine and we were graduating in a normal world. But just know that, your perspective and your attitude can really be important in all of this. And I know it's so hard. I think even before this pandemic, just when you do get rejected for a position or along those lines, and seeing it as an opportunity to redirect for your career. And maybe that's not the right opportunity, but to keep applying, keep looking out there, because there are still companies that are hiring. And as somebody who had graduated, around that time of the recession, and even one of the recruiters on my team, she went through the same thing. And I look back and where I am now, and, it was okay. So just know that there's a lot of uncertainty, but you have control over what you're doing and the positions you're applying to, and taking the time to really make sure your resume and cover letter is spot on.
Great advice. Thanks, Casey. Josh?
Sure. I mean, I think one thing I would say is this is super explainable. I mean, every recruiter that is a good recruiter will understand what you were doing during this time. I mean, be it January, be it December. I think that good recruiters are ultimately in the industry because we love stories. And this is a great time to think about, resilience, or the ability to frame what's been going on in your life, either personally or professionally, in a professional way. So I think that one thing that I'm most encouraged about is that almost if you ask anybody these days, what's going on, what was happening in 2020, everyone will say, COVID-19. They're not going to ask you, why did you have a gap? Why did you have no internship? If you're a junior or whatnot. So I think the one thing I would encourage people with is there are a lot of helpers out there right now. There are people that are trying to figure out how to help each other. So look for those people. But also just, recognize that sometimes you need to be able to help yourself before you can really help someone else. So if it's a matter of just stepping back and thinking about, did I pursue this degree because my parents wanted me to, or because I really wanted to? And deciding, how do you want to frame up that story? And thinking about how you want to tell it, I think is going to be really great. But no one will fault you because this wasn't your fault, I think is really what I'm landing on.
Great. I'm so glad you said that, Josh. I think that's really important for people to hear. Joel?
Yeah, absolutely. For myself, kind of similar to Casey's story. I mean, I joined the working force in 2002, and that was right in the middle of the post.com as well as the post 9/11 recession. And so certainly what I ended up finding for myself that ended up helping was trying not to compare myself with my peers and trying not to compare myself with my friends. The reason why I say that is, I had peers that had graduated in 2001 and things were looking pretty bright and hopeful in the spring of 2001. And when I tried to first enter the workforce in 2002, and I ended up trying to compare myself with the way that things were in 2001. Well, it was just a different time. And so as soon as I kind of level set my own personal expectations on that stuff, I found it much easier to be able to find a position that ended up matching for me and ended up coming through on that. So my recommendation, would be is, keep your expectations in check, make sure that you're evaluating against yourself and your own personal abilities and desires. And don't do too much in terms of evaluating yourself against your friends and your peers.
Thank you, Joel. Sarah.
I think my recommendation is being a little bit more comfortable with something perhaps a little non-traditional. So for example, maybe you are just wrapping up an undergraduate degree or a master's degree, or maybe you've been in the workforce for a very long time, but your thought is, getting a full-time permanent position, and that's been your goal the whole time. Absolutely, that should continue to be a goal if that's something that you've been focused on and thinking of, but maybe getting a little bit creative and in the interim being comfortable with a contract role or a part-time role. I think there are a fair number of companies that are shifting to contract work to kind of plug in some of the spots that they would love to have a full-time employee, but maybe can't justify from a financial standpoint right now, but they still need someone to get the work done. So if you really are looking for something, to keep you busy and to continue to get experiences, thinking through options like that, I think is really helpful. And again, no recruiter is going to fault you for, looking for a part-time role or a contract role in the meantime, because absolutely it's experience under your belt regardless. And again, given the current circumstances and situation, it's certainly explainable and a great option. The other thought I had too is, maybe continuing to upskill or up-level some of the talents that you'd really like to develop, or you've kind of had on a short to-do list for a long time, but just haven't had a chance to focus on it. So maybe look into some, online courses or some supplemental programs that, will get you some data analytics skills or, marketing skills or strategy and operations. Now is really the time to learn those skills, focus on developing yourself, and then hopefully being able to find something in the future where you can really, use that as a launching pad to get your career in the direction that you want it to go.
Awesome. Yeah, such great advice from you all. And even though the question was geared towards new grads, it's really applicable to everybody on this call today, no matter what stage you are at. The next question, what advice would you offer candidates that aren't hearing back from employers? They're submitting their resumes, they're sending, their resumes out, and then they're not hearing anything. How persistent should somebody be? What's the best way to follow up? Josh, how about I start with you?
Sure, I'm thinking about this. I think the first thing is that actually, as a recruiter, I'm going to speak for what my LinkedIn feed looks like right now. There are a lot of recruiters that are really uncertain about their jobs. When a company's not hiring, we're usually the first to go. So pre-COVID, I would probably suggest, find a recruiter that was in that functional area that you would be interested in working in, right? If you're interested in sales, go find a sales recruiter. But I think my strategy is going to shift. So I think these days what I'm thinking about is really looking for companies that are treating people really well right now. Maybe, they're laying off people, but their CEO is releasing a message to their workforce and they're being really thoughtful about it. So I think that's what I'm thinking about is, unlike reaching out before to recruiters at companies you were interested in, it might be a better approach to kind of start looking for companies that are doing things the right way, keeping those on your short list. And then when hiring reopens back up again, start to keep applying for those, right? It's easy to just apply for anything right now. And certainly you have to do that sometimes if you're unemployed to get those benefits. But if you're taking a long view of this situation, I would say it really is going to pay off to look for companies that are going to treat their workforce just as well now as they did before, if that makes sense.
That's such a great thing to be aware of. And yeah, it really says a lot about the company and how they're handling this whole thing. Yeah, that's wonderful. Casey?
Awesome. So when I think about, kind of the protocols or what's appropriate from a persistent standpoint in reaching out, I think one, especially during this time, that communication is so important. And I think if you've applied or perhaps you've reached the interview stage, you haven't heard back, certainly you should reach out, but that your outreach should be authentic, and really, what you're trying to learn. And what I've seen too at CU and even our current recruitments, typically it has been a longer period of time to fill those. And I anticipate that we will still have that going on in our searches, that we're posting positions for a longer period of time. We may be conducting hire views and allowing an extra amount of time for that, knowing that there's so many things going on with everyone in their lives, that there could be more time. So I think especially now, if your outreach is authentic, obviously not emailing every day, but keeping those lines of communication open and clear. And I really loved what Sarah said too, to be transparent with candidates. I think that's just so important right now. So I feel that if you do reach out, that you will get a response. And if it's a good recruiting and talent acquisition team, you're going to get a transparent and authentic response back.
Awesome. Thanks, Casey. Joel and Sarah, any additional comments?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add is, certainly remember that you're dealing with people behind the scenes. And so therefore, kind of treat it as you would like any other, potential new relationship, and follow, probably I'd say is, follow your instinct, follow your gut. Yeah, you're right. Probably a, everyday follow up, probably a little bit too persistent, but, just kind of do what's natural to you, realizing that you're dealing with people behind the scenes who, they have their own deadlines that they're trying to meet. They have their own lives that they've got their own, probably family stresses and everything like that going on as well. So, certainly allow for that as well.
Thanks,
I would
Joel.
just add to maybe put it back on the recruiter if you've been in touch with them and ask, what is an appropriate timeline for me to check back in with you? Should I check back in next Friday? Should I check back in 2 weeks? I know you've got a lot on your plate, but I just want to make sure that I'm being proactive and communicating. And then that way you hear directly from the recruiter. So that might be one helpful route. And then the other recommendation I have too is look at your LinkedIn network or connect with the career services team at CU. Maybe they know somebody at that company that they can just offer, another point of contact for you to check in, because maybe that other individual can kind of help nudge things in the right direction, or maybe that individual has more insight into what's going on behind the scenes and can kind of share an estimated timeline from their perspective. And at the very least, it'd be someone for you to just touch base with, regularly about a company that you might be interested in. So recruiter, network, that's kind of my recommendation.
Thanks, Sarah. It's such an interesting time right now, and so many people are looking for work, having been laid off. How does somebody stand out? How do they make themselves stand out right now? Any suggestions or advice you have about that? Casey, I'll start with you.
All right, great question. In particular, and right now, I think about some of the searches I'm supporting, and these are highly competitive numbers. For example, we have an academic coordinator position with athletics. We've already received over 200 plus applications. So how do you really stand out? And when I think about our upcoming graduates or early career folks, one strategy that I like to share is look closely at that job description in the posting when you're crafting your resume and your cover letter. Thinking about CU, what is it specifically about CU Boulder that's of interest? Why this department or why this institute? And really making sure that you've captured that information on your resume when looking at the qualifications or our preferred qualifications. That's one strategy versus, here's my experience, here's my resume, I'm just going to go and apply. You want to put in some effort on the front end, so that as we're reviewing hundreds of resumes, it's easy to see that you're in line there. So that would be one piece of advice I would say, is really focus on the job description of the posting and how you can incorporate those pieces into your application materials.
Awesome, thank you. Joel, go to you next.
Absolutely. Um, so certainly what I would say is, um, sorry, I apologize. Could you repeat the question? I was getting
Yeah,
ready for
just
notes
how,
here.
yeah, that's okay. Just to how can a candidate make themselves stand out right now? In the midst of all that's going on and so many people are applying for jobs, how does somebody make themselves stand out?
Absolutely. Sorry about that. Yeah. So what I'd say is, definitely, to me, what makes candidates shine out and stand out is, your accomplishments, your achievements that you can do. And, one of the things I can certainly think of is, kind of the age-old question of, well, how do I get a job without experience, and how do I get experience without a job? And so, to that point, I would say is, make sure that you're leaning on your hobbies as well. Don't forget that you can include in outside of work experience and achievements in your resume, and during your interviews and everything like that, and lean heavily on those, if need be. um, and make sure that whatever field you are, see if there's things that you can do to, either through volunteer experiences or through like groups, like say user groups, or uh, 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 groups that are associated with certain hobbies or passions or anything like that, that you can start building that personal resume as you will, because those are the things that at the end of the day you can always take with you. Those are things that never leave you as an individual.
Great, thanks, Joel. Josh?
Sure. I mean, I think that one thing that's becoming particularly interesting to me lately is portfolios. I mean, when people buy their name.com, right? And anyone can throw together a Squarespace site these days. I think it's actually, you don't even have to code, but maybe taking some of the jobs you've held and making like mini case studies about what you learned through them, so that there's a little more of an opportunity to get off the resume, because I think we're going to see a lot of resumes lately. And it's going to be pretty traditional in that sense, and you're not going to know necessarily the context behind that. So I think that if you're looking for something to do in your downtime, because there's going to be probably some of that for some of us more than others, it might be a great opportunity to really invest in something that sits outside of that 8x11 sheet of paper that everyone is submitting, and just kind of spend a little bit of time creating something unique to you, that ultimately ties back to your brand and the story you want to tell around it. And I think we're going to start to see that maybe a little bit more as people try to think about their career experience, but then also how that translates into what they want to do going forward.
Great tip. Thanks, Josh. Sarah, any last thoughts about that?
Yeah, everyone's had great advice so far on this question. Beyond that, just, really focusing on the quantifiable accomplishments that you have. So anytime that you can capture an impact, whether it's a number or a percentage, or, really just showing, how many people you worked with or how many groups, again, quantify the accomplishment and the impact that you've had. And then I would also, consider, and if you would have asked me 6 months ago, I might have had a different answer, because I feel like cover sheets are so subjective, right? Some people love them, some people hate them, some people say you have to have them, some people say don't do it at all. But now, I really think more than ever, it could be an opportunity for you to really make a case study for yourself beyond the resume. So again, thinking about your impact, what have you done in the past, or even what idea do you have for this company that you're applying to, or for the role that you're being considered for? How might you drive revenue? How might you save the company money? I think that, again, now more than ever, those differences or those kind of nuances and value that you can provide, it's going to be really helpful if you can either write that out in an email to the recruiter, or, again, provide a supplementary cover sheet. So again, if you would ask me 6 months ago, I might have had a different answer, but times are changing, and we've got to, be forward thinking and adapt as needed.
Yeah,
Can I add one thing?
absolutely.
Actually?
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
But with the current unemployment rate, there are a lot of really talented people that are unfortunately looking for work right now. And those people would have been inaccessible in a pre-COVID market, actually. So honestly, it's a great time to do some informational interviews, get in front of people that you would never have the opportunity to talk to, because they just happen to be available and they want to talk about themselves and kind of pick through it. So I'm thinking about that, because, I mean, gosh, when you have 40 million people that are impacted by this thing, there's a great opportunity for students or people thinking about career changing to talk to people that have done it and really understand if that's important, because chances are those are the people that are going to get placed quickly. And if you have a good reputation with them, when the market reopens, they can surface you also. So I'm thinking about that too.
I'm so thrilled. All of us career advisors on the call today are thrilled that you just said that, because that is truly one of the best ways to make yourself stand out. And so if there's people here today, if you're not familiar with informational interviewing, reach out to Jennifer and myself, and we'll share with you probably more than you want to hear about why that's such a beneficial tool. But thank you, Josh, for saying that. So great. So what are some common mistakes that you're noticing that candidates are making or have just made in the past that you've noticed when they're submitting their resumes, when they're submitting their cover letters and applying for jobs? What are just some things that they've done that are, you know, maybe not ideal? Who wants to start with that? Sarah, I'm going to have you start. How about that?
So it's an obvious one, but you'd be surprised how many times I've seen it happen. People forget to include an email address or a phone number or just contact information on their resume. So definitely make sure that's updated and that you're using an email address that you regularly check. I cannot emphasize that enough. Check it regularly if you're applying. I think beyond that, you know, again, simple grammatical errors and spelling mistakes can be, you know, a reason that someone, you know, you might be just as qualified as another candidate, but they've got to kind of make a decision, and that might be, you know, the ultimate deciding factor. Hopefully not, but it might be. So definitely, you know, have a friend, have a peer, have the career services team take a peek and just double check that from a, you know, formatting, spelling, grammatical perspective, things are, you know, in line. And I think beyond that too, you know, again, really tailoring your resume to highlight the skills and experiences of that job description. Casey mentioned it before, but if you're looking at minimum qualifications, if you're looking at preferred qualifications, really demonstrating and using some of those keywords and phrases in your resume will kind of help you stand out and hopefully pop to the top of that application queue.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Casey?
Yeah, definitely to second Sarah, attention to detail is so crucial. I've seen that in some resumes where either there's a grammatical error or inconsistent punctuation. Oftentimes at CU, I'll see that, you know, I'm under the assumption if you're applying to my job, you're probably applying to others, which you should, but make sure that it's correct. So you don't say, I'm so excited to come work for CSEO. You know, we want you to be excited to come work for CU Boulder. You know, small things like that can really speak volumes to some of our hiring managers. It won't be a disqualification, but if it's a role where attention to detail is so critical and we're already seeing some errors on your resume, it does cause some initial red flags. So definitely seconding Sarah, get a second set of eyes on your materials. You know, if you're working on your resume, walk away for a bit as well and then come back. But absolutely want to have some good attention to detail on your materials.
Good tips for sure. Josh?
The one I've seen actually more frequently than normal is sometimes I'll call a candidate to relay some important information and the voicemail box is full. It cannot accept new messages at this time. And then it hangs up on me. And given that people don't pick up their phone for numbers they don't recognize, I can't necessarily cue that person that something really needs to happen in a world where hiring is, you know, quickly turning along. So if you haven't done it, I would definitely suggest go into your voicemail, clear it out, and be ready for when opportunity comes calling, because honestly, that's sometimes how a recruiter will get in touch with you when there are things that need to move faster than just sending an email. Sometimes we have 2 minutes between another meeting and we can give you a call. And it would take us 4 minutes to write that email, so we'd quickly rather get a hold of you if we could. So that's just a thought, but that's one that I've actually seen quite a bit lately, and I think it makes all the difference.
Thanks, Josh. Joel, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just re-echo definitely, you know, grammatical errors, making sure that everything that you put on your resume is the most that you can do to put your foot forward to really sell yourself. You know, certainly keep it nice and concise. You know, kind of general rule of thumb usually is like 2-page resumes. But making sure that you know, everything that you put on there is something to further yourself and to sell yourself a little bit more.
Great advice. So I'm looking at the time. I want to make sure we have a lot of people, both on Facebook Live and Zoom. I want to now turn it over and get some of your questions. Jennifer Duncan has been monitoring that. So Jen, I'm going to turn it over to you. And what questions does the audience have for our recruiters?
Sure. Yeah, we are getting a lot of questions, which is great. Here is one that I'm seeing a great deal of. A lot of people are asking about internships. Do you have thoughts on summer internships, suggestions for students or grad students? Simply because one of the folks said, you know, I had an internship, and then the company basically pulled back and said, nope, we're not going to have any summer interns. And so, and this particular person said, I had an internship involving physical robotics and mechatronics that was canceled. But there's been other people asking about internships as well. And what should I do at this point in time? Should I take multiple online classes? Should I point my career toward the software side of robotics before, you know, or what?
Sarah, I'm looking right at you. You want to start?
Sure. Yeah. First and foremost, I am so sorry to hear that. It's a really tough, tricky position to be in. And, you know, obviously you've put so much work into obtaining this internship just to get the not so great news is obviously disappointing, but I think you've got the right idea, you know, in terms of being creative and adapting and seeing where else you can kind of plug in. You know, maybe it is an opportunity to take additional classes and really just make the most of the time that you now have that's free. Or even reaching out to the company, you know, whether it's the recruiter or maybe you were in touch with your potential internship manager already, but reach out to them and say, hey, you know, I understand that, you know, this is looking very different, but is there an opportunity for me to even sit in on some meetings or, you know, pick your brain and learn about some of the projects that you're working on, or just still stay connected to you and the team in some capacity? Because I think that'll give you a lot of exposure to maybe what the team is doing and what you might have been able to do as a formal intern. But again, stay connected with that company, see if there are opportunities to plug in. And then again, explore academic projects that you could get involved with, or even, you know, again, pivoting from hardware to software. It's not the worst idea, but I think, you know, if your passions are in hardware, keep pursuing that while supplementing it with something like software. So you're even more well-rounded in that industry.
Thanks, Sarah. Josh, any comments?
Sure. I mean, I think we often look at internships as what are they going to teach us? But the reality is that company hired you because you were going to help them with something, right? I mean, I think that's really the truth of the matter is I used to think, oh, I took on this internship. I'm going to learn so much from these people. But I mean, they paid you, right? Or they were going to, which means that you brought value to them. So don't forget that if a company did extend you an offer, you were actually going to provide something to them. And so maybe think about, based on the conversations you had with the managers or maybe even with the recruiter, what pain point were they trying to solve by initially wanting to hire you pre-COVID? And is that something that you're able to maybe create your own self-study project out of? That kind of gives it a twist on what that was supposed to look like, right? I mean, and like Sarah said, it's unfortunate and I'm super sorry for anyone that's in that spot. But the reality is, I mean, just getting an internship in general means that you really have good skills. And I hope that's encouraging to you all because the world is going to need you all when we come back. And maybe that will look like an entry-level job instead of an internship. Who knows, right?
Yeah, great. Casey?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Josh and Sarah. And again, I'm so sorry that you're in that situation and it's incredibly discouraging, but I think to Josh's point, they saw value in your skill sets and to maintain those lines of communication and to make sure that you're still connected with that person in your network. And as I think to earlier on in this session, when Josh was saying, you know, we're not going to judge or evaluate there's a gap in your resume. You know, we are all going through this, and I anticipate the next year it's going to look incredibly different. So I think if there are opportunities for additional trainings to pursue that, you know, to maximize our time, it may not be the plan that we had in mind, but remember that you have control over your own actions and, you know, trainings that you want to pursue, maintaining those relationships. But I think both Josh and Sarah, that's great advice.
Thanks, Casey. Joel, any comments?
Yeah, I'll just tack on. Yeah, I mean, sympathies for people who are stuck in that situation. It's certainly something that you don't want to have to face. But yeah, I mean, you know, try to keep, you know, look at your gratitudes, you know, kind of keep a look at, you know, things that you can control. Try to take a look at things you can do. Certainly, you know, try to reach out to networks. Try to see what other things you can do in terms of advancement, in terms of, you know, other academic courses, or, you know, even potentially going out and freelancing for a bit over the summer if you can.
Thank you. All right. Next question, Jen.
Okay. Next question is, how can a master's student looking for management level internships in project management make a great application without 1 to 2 years of full-time work experience, but only internship experience?
Who wants to start with that? Casey, I'm just looking at who's on my screen here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so just to make sure I'm understanding the question, you know, looking at that internship experience possibly for a project management role, or like how to apply those pieces. I mean, and kudos that you've had this internship experience, right? And we touched on it of how do you get experience without having the experience. And I think really, you know, quantifying what you did in that role. What was the scope of your project? You know, as Sarah mentioned too, I was like so excited about like, yes, quantify on your resume. It's so important because it does, it shows the scope of what you worked on. So I think, you know, again, when you're looking at these positions, looking at the job description and then also your internship experience and what's transferable, what overlaps. You know, I've had experience in this area, which is really going to bring value to your position. So I think it'll take some investigating and really looking at what is going to be applicable and transferable. But that's great with the experience too. You know, especially as you're earlier in your career, but even as a grad student, what opportunities can you then take from those experiences and looking at the job description?
Thanks, Casey. Yeah, Josh.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is a suggestion I had for some people, but maybe it's a recruiter one, is go try to hire yourself. Go on LinkedIn and pretend that you were going to go find somebody that's doing what you want to do, right? What kind of companies would they come from? What kind of education would they have? And really look for these people and then take their names and go to Google and see if you can find their portfolio or something online that outlines for you what they're doing. So not only find people that are doing what you want to do, but almost see if there's a way that you can kind of emulate that and think about where are the gaps in my skill set that I need to plug in order to land that. And where are the commonalities that I've gotten from my internships that really I could represent on a portfolio in a good way. So sometimes people only think about themselves as a candidate, but there are a lot of people out there that have things that you can kind of just click around on and look at. And I think that's a good way to see what the market is doing right now, but also what people have done successfully to land roles that you're interested in.
Thanks, Josh. Joel and Sarah, any additional comments? It's okay if you don't.
I'll just be quick. Yeah, I mean, definitely take the creative approach too in terms of how you can help to sell yourself. Kind of one thing that had brought to mind is I'd interviewed someone a while back for a technology position, and the question along the lines was, what was a time that you faced a difficulty and how'd you overcome it? And the person happened to be, and their answer was that they happened to be a dancer, and there was a point in time where they were struggling to find facilities and everything like that in order to do stuff. So they ended up setting up their own workshop at home and everything like that. To me, that's just kind of that creative approach of being able to sell yourself and to expand on those kind of things. So things like that, and I was impressed with the answer. So things like that definitely help to shine on those kind of things.
Nice. Thanks, Joel.
I
Sarah?
would also recommend just tapping into maybe the alumni network, because if you're about to graduate from, I forget if it was an MBA or a master's, and you're looking to get into a specific role or industry, previous grads might already be in that industry and might be more willing to help. Just, a fellow buff, be more excited to connect with someone who did a cold outreach like that. So leveraging your network, seeing who else, has a common background to kind of launch that conversation, I think is really helpful. And then do a quick search. I know I'm biased. Do a quick Google search, but check out, what companies might be really known for hiring master's or MBA grads. And that I think could also kind of help, especially like you said, you've got work experience, but it's internship work experience. But companies known for hiring master's and MBA grads are probably more open-minded and creative in thinking about different backgrounds of their hires.
Great. Yeah, and LinkedIn is truly the best spot to find other alums. So just a plug for LinkedIn and where to find the alums. Jen, next question.
So this person says, I'm an international student and have been looking for an internship, but no progress so far. Most of the companies have canceled their internship programs due to current crisis. What would be your tips for me reaching out to the recruiters who are hiring international students? And I would have to say, maybe how can they identify first what recruiters are hiring, what employers are hiring international students?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, especially now. Yeah, who wants to start with that? Sarah?
So I have to imagine similar to, different community groups or, clubs that you might be joining, maybe there is an international student resource or international clubs or other folks that you might be able to connect with and just brainstorm. And I use them as a sounding board. What tips have you found? What research have you done? So I think just brainstorming amongst some peers who have similar backgrounds or experiences would be helpful. I think that's my first piece of recommendation. And then beyond that, again, do a quick Google search, because there are definitely some live updated resources right now that are listing what companies are hiring, what companies may be in a hiring freeze, but leverage those crowdsourced boards to get some more information about companies that are actively hiring still. And then cross-reference, look at their website and kind of see a little bit more about the open roles, open positions, and even cross-reference again further to look at LinkedIn and see if there are different people that you can connect with and ask those questions a little bit more pointedly to get direct insight for that specific company.
Great. And those sites actually are on our LinkedIn CU Boulder job search group that I mentioned at the first, when we first started the session today. So check that out. There are some great sites that are showing you who's hiring, who's on a hiring freeze and all of that. So check that out. All right, Casey.
Yeah, I think networking is really powerful in this time with your fellow students, your peers, and especially like as an international student, there are certain companies that may have hiring restrictions or might be under a hiring freeze. And I know for me in my career, I've always looked at companies like, where am I going to be passionate and happy working for this company? So I think the company culture is so important too. It's beyond the salary. There's other factors that your happiness is so important in all of this, and that you're passionate in what you're doing. So I would start with that approach too, of one, what companies are hiring and what companies are you really passionate and interested in working for, because that will carry through in your application and your interview. Because the end goal is we want to get you in a good career where you're happy and feeling fulfilled. So, you'll have to do a little bit of research, but between networking, seeing what groups are hiring, I think is a great starting point.
Thanks, Casey. Josh?
I think there's so much to be said for the diverse perspective that international students bring. I'm personally really passionate about that. I think the one thing I've noticed is that a lot of my peers in recruiting, I'm not speaking about any of the panelists here, but I worked at companies where people don't understand what it takes to hire an international student. But the international student certainly does, and they have a good understanding of that because they understand what restrictions go on with that. So if you do happen to talk to a recruiter, it's okay to educate them a little bit. Sometimes we assume they might know what that takes, but they don't. And the only reason I figured it out was because I actually had a bunch of international students I worked with when I was in university recruiting that actually sat down with me and talked to me about it. So I think it's a good thing to just think about, is like sometimes there's just missing information there. It's not that the recruiter doesn't want to hire you, but you know, if you educate them, you're going to make them a better professional. Maybe not for you necessarily in that moment, but for the other people that will come after you, right? And so I think about that is sometimes it's okay to provide a little bit more context if you think it will be helpful, but certainly on the application, if it asks, you know, will you need sponsorship now or in the future, it, you know, pays to be truthful about that, because that is a question you're going to be asked about again, and you certainly don't want there to be a mismatch between what you say and what comes out of your mouth later on in the process when they're excited about it. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Thanks, Josh. Joel, any comments?
No, I don't think I have anything to add. I think those are all excellent answers.
Okay, great. So yeah, we have a mixed group today. We have a lot of students on the call and we have alums, all stages. So we're doing our best to try to answer questions that will support all of you. Jen, let's, any alumni related questions that we can throw out to the panelists?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple questions here about, because I think you all talked earlier about ethical companies. So the questions are, what are the most reliable resources for evaluating how well and ethical companies treat their employees? And then how might an outsider obtain the perspective of how a company treats its employees?
Very interesting question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Joel, how about I start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, you know, kind of get an insight to companies. I mean, certainly you can use sites like Glassdoor or something like that. But one thing I find that's truly valuable is, it's been kind of touched on a few times, is build your network. You know, if you're applying for a particular company, check your LinkedIn networks, check, you know, your Rolodex if you still have one. And see, you know, like who you happen to have who works there or who used to work there, and kind of tap on them, because they'll probably give you a more honest answer. The other thing too is certainly, you know, realize too is that when you go for an interview, the interview is a two-way street. Not only is the company kind of chatting with you to see if you're a good candidate, a good fit for the company, but you should also be taking that as an opportunity for yourself to see if that company happens to be a good fit for you. So, you know, certainly observe as much as you can, ask questions, ask pertinent questions to how you might like the company. Take that time, take that opportunity.
Thanks, Joel. Josh?
I think one thing I've learned is you can never really know for certain, but the one thing that you can know is that the people you're working with, you can understand if you want to get along with them, right? I mean, I think Deloitte has a reputation of being super hard charging, you know, we're always traveling, always doing that. And the group I happen to support never traveled, right? They were very kind, down to earth. And I think sometimes you think about consultants and you're like, wow, you're so pie in the sky, heady type of people. But honestly, I joined because I love the team I worked with. And so sometimes we eliminate companies just on the basis of thinking about what they're like on the surface, but we don't necessarily think about the people we'd be working with, right? You can work for a great manager at a bad company. You can work for, you know, vice versa. So I think it comes down to, if you can talk to the team and really understand them and see if there's good, not necessarily chemistry, but a good fit for you in terms of how they talk, how they care about you as a person, you might actually be really happy there. And it might not necessarily be with a company mom and dad have heard of, but it might be with a company that you'll be really happy at and talk about every single chance you get. So I think that there are hidden gems everywhere is really what I'm trying to say.
Thanks, Josh. Sarah, how about you?
Yeah, that's great advice, Josh. Beyond that, do a quick look into some news that's been published maybe about the company. I think take it with a grain of salt, right? You know, it's always written from a different perspective or a specific angle, whether it's, you know, PR that the company is trying to put out there to make them look more in a positive light, or maybe it's, you know, a one-off situation, circumstance of one individual, and it's really tainting the whole company's perspective. So again, read the news articles with a grain of salt, but I think very generally speaking, it'll give you insight into, you know, trends that they have been a part of, or initiatives that they've started, or how they're giving back to the community. So I think that that can definitely be a valuable resource, as long as you know, do some additional research and vetting on your own to really determine, okay, is that a spun article with a specific spin and a lens, or is this a real representation of the company?
Good advice. Thanks, Sarah. Casey, last thoughts?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, I agree with all my fellow recruiters. There's online resources and networking. A piece that really stood out to me is when you're in the interview process for a company, and think about, as much as that team is interviewing you, you're interviewing them as well. And some of those questions could be telling about the culture, and to really take that opportunity in the moment. I know that for me and within talent acquisition, culture and collaboration were huge for me in my career. And I got that sense from the interview, from my research, what our values are at CU. So I think it's a combination of a variety of elements: doing your research, networking, and just really having your eyes open through the process, and doing some self-discovery. What's going to be important to your values, and does that align with the company that you're applying to?
The next question, how do you make sure that as a person of color, you are not being hired as the token person of color?
I'm going to try to be careful about how I talk about this, but I've definitely been in interviews where I know I was the token person, so I guess I understand what that question is asking. I think one thing that I want to say is that sometimes you don't know, and that's unfortunate, but part of the reason why you can join that company if you get that job is to move the needle there, right? And I think that there's a real opportunity to, even if you don't get the job, have your voice at the table, because these voices need to be heard. In the interview process, people need to be encouraged to think about this actively. And if a company's really resistant to that, then that's something to consider as you ask yourself if you feel like you can influence it in a positive way in that job. But with that being said, a lot of bigger companies have ally groups for different, people from different backgrounds, and you can really do a quick search for those and see if there's a group at that company that really hits what you're looking for. Because sometimes, even if that company as a structure might not seem on the surface like it's open to that, a lot of times employees rally around these groups that matter to them. And I think that's really important, because those are easily findable, sometimes on LinkedIn or by doing a quick Google search, or sometimes companies will talk about it on their careers page. And I think that's a really neat way to lean into that and have your voice heard, even in a smaller community, even if it's not at the company at large, right? These people are the ones that are moving and shaking things up, and they do it in smaller numbers than you might think, but it's very impactful.
Great, thank you. Casey, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would say when you think about diversity and inclusion, and even our recruiting process at CU, we're reviewing your application based on the qualifications, your gender, race, vet status. That isn't going to play a role in the decision making. And when I think about diversity and outreach efforts and kind of all that pieces in recruiting, I see inclusion as a separate piece, in that that's a part of your company culture. And, so to be aware of that in the interview process, I would certainly hope, and it's heartbreaking, even the thought a recruiter would pick a candidate based on someone's skin color. For me, it's are you the most qualified candidate for this job? But then also from the candidate perspective, is this a culture and community that you want to be a part of? And diversity and inclusion is a daily initiative, or at least it should be for all of us. You result in better hires. But again, just to make my point short, we would never hire someone just based on the color of their skin, their gender, their race, religious beliefs.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, great points all around. And I think that as a candidate, you can also do your due diligence by checking that job description and checking your experiences. If you feel like this is kind of weird, I wanted to apply to this role because it was a stretch role, but I really only meet one or two of the minimum qualifications. Why are they interviewing me? I think you can turn that back to the recruiter or the hiring manager when you have that conversation with them and ask, obviously I'm very thankful for this opportunity. I'm very excited to be a part of the interview process, but out of curiosity, what stood out about me? You know, why do you see me adding value to your team? And really making sure that their response resonates with what you want to be doing, I think will kind of help vet and make sure that it's an environment that you want to be a part of and you feel like you're going to be valued for your ideas and your opinions and your perspective, not just because, you know, of a group that you might identify with.
Mhm. Great, thank you. Joel, do you have anything to add?
No, I think those are good answers.
Okay. Well, listen, we are right at 1 o'clock, and I'm sorry if we weren't able to get to your questions. You can certainly send those in to us. career@colorado.edu. And, but also I want to let everyone know that access to this recording will be available on our website, the Career Services website for CU Boulder, under the resources page. And then also it will be available on the CU Boulder Career Services Facebook page. So again, I want to thank all of our panelists. Thank you
Yay.
for everything. Josh, Casey, Sarah, and Joel, your insight was just wonderful. And I'll just hand it back over to Leah now.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to the panelists for sharing your wisdom and your time. We just so appreciate it. And yeah, let us know, for the rest of you students and alumni, let us know how we can support you as you move through this time. We're here for you. Go Buffs.